I'm going up to my granddaughter's birthday in New York. Then we're going to watch a debate. And then tomorrow I'm doing 9/11.
Yes, folks, Biden has got plans tomorrow. Welcome.
I literally just did a spit take off camera. I did not know. This is what they've taken. This is what the shadow party has taken from all of us.
Well, I mean, apparently he's not taking it lying down. So,
After old Irish Joe is back.
Not the first person, but I think Edinger Mentum was the first person I saw saying, that Dick Cheney endorsement really comes with
jogged the memory a little bit. That's beautiful. Well, folks, hope you are good wherever you are at. This is Left Reckoning. David here, joined with Matt. We're going to be talking about what is next for democratic socialism with Nick French and Neil Meyer. You all know they're writing from Jackman and other places, and also Left Notes, which is a newish Substack that y'all should definitely be keeping up with and reading. There's a link there below to do it. And then, of course, it's debate night, everyone's favorite evening of the year. We aren't going to be going out or doing anything for it. We're going to be giving y'all straight analysis right here before it starts.
It's not very often you get two first debates versus the presidential contenders in a year, and it's funny because like the narrative is shifted a little bit to like this is really tough on Kamala. To like it's almost unfair to expect her to do this all, and like I understand, like I think Dave Weigel's a good reporter and he made a good like version of that argument, but also like I also think it's kind of unfair to Trump in a way. Like he could make that argument like, hey, I was pasting Joe Biden and this like fair. Who gives a damn about fair? You're trying to win the presidency. Like
I mean, they lost. They lost in round one, and they had to do a major substitution. So.
Tag team, yeah,
little tag team democracy. That's what we should have called the episode. But yeah, folks. I mean, so just giving folks a quick programmatic update before we get into everything. We're giving everyone a special treat just for tonight. We're going to have an open post game. Yes, you heard it here, folks. Y'all will be able to join us in the fun side of the program. Don't worry, patrons. We're still going to be making sure that y'all are heard loud and clear. So we'll be taking y'all's Patreon questions over in the Discord. So get over there for that portion of it. But it'll be up. This conversation will be up on YouTube and on Twitch. We will appreciate super chats and probably take some of those as well. So we'll be getting to that shortly after our conversation with Neil and Nick, but it's all included tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And do give us a follow on Twitch. That's going to be a point of emphasis. I want to grow the Twitch stream.
Matt just got a new gaming controller, and he wants to become a Twitch streamer really, really bad. So
they just announced the PS5
sweet boy's
Pro.
dream come true.
Yeah, they just announced the PS5 Pro. I gotta.
All right. Well, we're going to be joined by Neil and Nick in just a moment. But before we get there, and before we start talking more about the debate, I want to talk about something that's been, pretty disappointing, and that has been the kind of bear hug that we've seen from Bernie Sanders around the first Biden administration and now the Kamala administration as she runs for president. Just a pretty serious rhetorical shift. And just to make this point clear, we're going to be talking about two different monsters. And let's hear the different way that Bernie Sanders is talking about them. So this is just from the other day.
Senator, before I let you go, I do have to ask you about her recent endorsements by two people who are not progressives at all. Of course, I'm talking about Dick and Liz Cheney. This week, they said they're going to support her. They're going to vote for her. It's worth noting, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney voted with former President Trump more than 90% of the time, was quite critical when President Biden picked her as his running mate. Would you welcome seeing Liz Cheney out on the campaign trail?
Well, Kristen, what I think Dick and Liz Cheney are saying is that in this existential moment in American history, it's not just issues. Cheney and I agree on nothing, no issues. But what we do believe in is that the United States should retain its democratic foundations. And it's not just Cheney. I think there is a significant number of Republicans who say, well, you know, I may not agree with the vice president on this issue or that issue, but I cannot support somebody who's a pathological liar, somebody who fomented a insurrection to overthrow the election return. So I applaud the Cheneys for their courage in defending democracy. Obviously, on all the issues, we have very different points of view.
All right.
You know, I'll tell you, there's a moment there where towards the end when he's talking about somebody trying to overturn the election and all this kind of stuff that I thought he might be talking about Dick Cheney, but
That's what I'm saying. Like, this is what's frustrating is like and you know, Bernie knows this stuff. It's just like that there's a huge problem with, like, I listen to NPRs on the media and they commission somebody who isn't the normal host to do an investigation into the 2001 Bush versus Gore decision. And the end of that person's investigation, they're like, I went into this expecting there to be interesting arguments on both sides. And actually it looked like a stolen election. It's because, like, yeah, that's what it was. But we don't have like a real, like, despite January 6th and us all needing to take democracy really seriously now, we haven't grappled at all with like the immediate history of that happening in this country.
I mean, you know, the rebrand or the rehabilitation of people like Dick Cheney and W in this country has been nothing short of amazing, frankly. I mean, maybe just to like to make this point clear while that clip is fresh in your mind, here's Bernie Sanders a couple years back talking about another monster and criminal, Kissinger.
In the last debate, I believe in her book, very good book, by the way, in her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince Sihanouk, created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
Well, I know journalists have asked who you do listen to on foreign policy, and we have yet to know who that is.
Well, it ain't Henry Kissinger, that's
fine.
for sure.
That's fine. You know,
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the depressing thing is, Bernie is a politician, right? Like, people, I think it's overstated to the effect he tells it like it is or whatever. When he says, Hillary, I read in your book and it was a great
it
book,
was very good. Yeah.
he is lying for political effect there. But it's interesting, like, the way he will emphasize to different audiences, because, you know, the Theo Von interview I thought was very good. And he had a good take on this democracy thing, which is like, look, there are democratic elements here. We're in an oligarchy, okay, and we get that, right? And it's just interesting, like, the way he can say that to Theo Von, that and frankly, a much more mature conversation about the state of our democracy than you can do on a cable news show.
Yeah, and I don't want to, front load too much of what we're going to be talking about with Neil and Nick in just a little bit. So I'll hold off on some of that, but I will just sort of note that I think that the section, right, comparing both the Cheney and the Kissinger conversation there from Bernie, I think shows a lot of where that political project is right now, where it is purely on defense, right? Where when that Hillary Clinton exchange happened, this is Bernie Sanders articulating a very different kind of politics from the Democratic Party. And with the Cheney thing, you could tell Bernie's uncomfortable. You can tell he's not, he's very clever there. Give him credit to like not say things like I love Cheney or Cheney's good, or he sees all these kind of things. He's like, I don't agree with him on anything. But we're going to stop this from happening. So it's like a defensive kind of thing there. But that shows that we're no longer driving the conversation. And exactly what's happening right now is that the Kamala Harris campaign has decided, hey, let's run a political campaign for Republican dads who sometimes get mad when Trump says stupid things on TV. And I don't think that's really going to be a winning strategy. I think it really plays a big role in disillusioning many people in politics. It certainly makes a lot of people in DC happy. It makes a lot of careerists in the Democratic Party happy because it means that they don't really have to take hardline positions on certain issues to maintain and protect their jobs. But for the rest of us, these kind of fuzzy politics where, hey, you know what? Remember those guys who did the Iraq War? They like us now, and we're all on the same side against Big Bad Donnie. I think that kind of lack of division in politics, which is fundamentally what politics is about, is does not bode well for the future or for the Kamala Harris campaign.
Yeah, when I enlist in a fight against the right in this country, it is not just Mar-a-Lago. It is inclusive of Donald Trump. It is, and it just campaign season sucks. And especially it's funny, like contrasting Bernie as mayor of Burlington being like, look, I don't know if we can really endorse Jesse. He's working with the Democrats too close. We don't really believe in that, but I like a lot of what he's saying. And now being like, look, we both believe in saving our Democratic foundations. Like, he knows that ain't true, man. He knows that they don't agree about the Democratic Foundation. What they agree about is they fucking don't like Donald Trump and don't want him to be in power.
Yeah.
Say that.
Yeah. Well, folks, we're going to go and talk a bit more about that and maybe how we can consider to build a stronger and more militant fighting left in this country with Nick and Neil. Really do suggest people go and subscribe to Left Notes on Substack and keep up with everything going on in Jackman Magazine, of course. We're going to go over that conversation when we get back. Matt and I are going to come by and say hello, and then we're going to go over to the post game. You can support the program and get every post game, every bonus episode at patreon.com/leftreckoning, where Matt and I have been really tearing it up on the other side of the paywall. Y'all don't want to be missing that. But tonight we will open it up to everybody because, this is too much of a political nerd thing, Matt, to like turn into like a major campaign slogan or movement demand. But I think that like the presidential debate should be free for all. I actually think that it is wild to sort of limit access to these kind of things to people who have a subscription to, I don't know, Google or the cable company or however people get these kind of things.
It's part of the corporate takeover of America. Yeah, you're exactly.
It really is. Like, it's extremely embarrassing for our democracy that it's that way.
It used to be like the League of Women Voters were in charge of all these things, and now it's like, nope, Disney got that now. It's horrible.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of other things on our plate, so I'm not going to start marching on the Capitol over that just yet. But Matt and I will be giving the post game out to the public, so you can get access to that by staying on the stream. But please do consider supporting the show at patreon.com/leftreckoning. But yeah, Matt, let's jump over this conversation with Nick and Neil. It's really, really interesting. I hope y'all enjoy it. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. Really excited to be here. We're going to be kind of wrestling with the big questions of the day here. I think this is a very difficult moment, I think, for a lot of people who are really inspired by Bernie Sanders style politics back in the day. And I really couldn't think of two better people to do that with than Nick French and Neil Meyer. Before we get into this conversation, I was wondering, and maybe start with you, Nick, if you guys could just introduce yourselves to the audience if they're unfamiliar with y'all and your work.
Sure. Hey, y'all. I'm Nick. I've been active on the left for going on 6 or 7 years now. Got excited in 2017, joined DSA. I've been was really active in DSA starting in 2018, going through the Bernie campaign. And yeah, I I don't think we have the same kind of energy or sense of purpose we did back then. I'm an editor at Jacobin Magazine, where I've been working for a while, and I write the Left Notes blog with Neil here, along with writing for a few other publications.
Yeah, Neil, if you don't mind telling
Sure.
folks a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah, my name is Neil Meyer. I am a DSA member, an activist since 2012. I can claim some old DSA credit there. And I've been writing for Jacobin and other publications for a few years about questions of strategy for the socialist left, and also writing about the Democratic Party and its role in American politics. And I also, to my disgrace, am a grad student and am writing a dissertation about the Democratic Party since the 1980s. So that's my kind of academic research.
Well, fascinating. Well, they'll come in and they'll be very helpful here. Well, I mean, why don't you just sort of set the stage for folks? It's sometimes a little bit difficult. Taking the long view can both be something that makes me very optimistic and very pessimistic about the current moment, because I remember the kind of conversations that were happening on the left, like in 2015, 2014, fairly pathetic compared to the conversations we were having in 2019 and 2020. At the same time, now I think at those conversations that we were having in places like Jacobin, on shows like the Michael Brooks Show, or on Left Reckoning back then, and it feels like we're very far away from some of the enthusiasm and sense of possibility that we had back in that moment. And so, I mean, maybe before we get into like the strategy, how to get out of here, I mean, how would you categorize this particular moment for this Democratic Socialist project? And I guess I can throw to you first, Neil, if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing I tell myself to make myself feel better about this situation is that, and I think this is true, that the left and the socialist movement and the workers' movement has been, around since the 19th century, depending on when you want to date it, but it's had its ebbs and flows ever since. So there have been moments of upsurge and excitement and energy and mass mobilization, which is something I think we experienced, even in, if it was in a small scale, we experienced from about 2015 to 2020 or 2021, depending on when you want to date it. And for many people on the left now, that was the moment they came into politics. And so it felt like a kind of forward charge for all those years. And I think people were very excited by that and inspired by that. But the movement has also had plenty of ebb periods when things have kind of slowed down, when mobilizations have been smaller or non-existent, when we feel like we've been handed defeats, or some of our leaders have been co-opted or pulled towards the right. There have been moments like that. I think the 1980s were such a decade after the 60s and 70s, which were periods of radicalization across at least the advanced capital, across the world, actually, for the left, and some advances for the left in national liberation struggles and in the radicalization of social democracy in the 70s in particular. 80s were a period of ebb across the world. And that's the other interesting thing, is it tends to have kind of an international dimension to it as well. So 80s were an ebb, 90s were kind of like a downtime. And then you start to feel, that's kind of my childhood, my political development was like, I remember the 1999 Seattle WTO protests, and then the anti-war movement around the Iraq war. And you can kind of feel in the 2000s, like something's starting to change. And we really saw that sort of escalation in the 2010s. And Bernie was really kind of the manifestation of that in the United States, but Corbyn was that in UK, Syriza was that in Greece, the Workers' Party and the Socialist Left was that in Brazil. There were all kinds of, the revolutions in the Middle East were part of that wave. So that's all to say that there have been these ebbs and flows, and I think we're in an ebb period now. And for a lot of people on the left, it's kind of shocking to see our side kind of be down in the way it is. But I do think that history gives us some kind of comfort too, to know that like these things do turn around. And the question really is like, what do you do in a period like this? And I'd love to talk more about that, but I think that a period like this is a big opportunity for learning and developing and crafting a program, and most importantly, building kind of the base organizations and the accumulating the resources that are going to be needed for the next upsurge, because that's something we really didn't have in 2015. We kind of made it up as we went along.
Yeah, I think that that's actually like a very important point. Is that like we might have had like the gasoline, but we didn't have the truck yet. That's not too tortured of a metaphor. But like, Nick, I wanted to like bring you in here just to talk a little bit. You wrote a piece in Jackman like right after the DNC about Bernie Sanders' kind of speech. And, I think for a lot of us, it's really hard seeing Bernie sort of play this role that he's playing with regards to the Biden administration, the Kamala administration. And I'm just wondering, I'd also love to hear your sort of general sense about where you're thinking we are right now, but maybe looking at kind of like Bernie as like very emblematic as a kind of figure for the difficulty of this moment.
Yeah, well, that's a good lead into what I wanted to add to what Neil was saying, is I think in talking about this period of ebb specifically, we really have to grapple with this phenomenon of, I hate to use the word co-opting because it makes me sound kind of like a sectarian or something. But this phenomenon of people like Bernie and AOC and other sort of people who were left standard bearers for a while, around the time of the 2020 presidential election, they have been sort of incorporated into the Biden administration and now the Harris campaign more. And I think the main reasons for that are, one, the kind of urgency that they see, which I largely agree with, about defeating Trump, defeating the an increasingly radical Republican right. But part of it is because I think Biden has, done some good things. And this is something I've written about at length, kind of trying to evaluate, like, well, in what respects has Biden been good for the left or labor? And we can get more about that. But I think Neil and I both agree that, the sort of progressive credentials of the Biden administration have been very much exaggerated, I think, including by people like Bernie. So that is, I think, one of the difficulties in our moment is you have Bernie and a lot of folks on the kind of Democratic left, Democratic Socialist left, becoming kind of Biden or Harris boosters. So I'm still unsure, what to do about that or what the way forward is. But
well, no, on that, just like to make, I think most people are aware of like what's happened politically over the past 4 years. But how would you like describe like the Bernie Sanders Biden political strategy, right? It's pretty much been a kind of bear hug. If we seem very enthusiastic about this, we'll be able to be more influential than if we're antagonists. Do you think that's a fair way to put it? Particularly Bernie, I think that probably is the case. But
I think that's right. I think the idea is that by being enthusiastic, by being a good team player, we can get a lot of concessions. And Biden did invite, early on invited Bernie and AOC into, committees where they're drafting the platform. The question is what actually results from that and how hard are party leaders like Biden pushing for it? Neil, maybe this is a good time for you to come in, Neil. You wrote a piece for Left Notes on the junior partner strategy. That's the label used to describe Bernie's orientation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think they have this idea that there's been this fundamental change in the Democratic Party, and that Biden is the representative of that, and that there's now this huge opportunity for the left to organize from within the party at its leadership, highest level in Congress and in the White House, organize the party towards some sort of left reformist program. And I think they see that opportunity and they say, okay, well, how do we make use of that? Their theory of making use of it is basically, working in lockstep with Biden and Pelosi or Jeffries, Schumer to push these things. These people share our values. Basically, I mean, we may not be on the same page on everything, but like there's a big opportunity here. And so, since they're our allies, since we share these values, we've got to collaborate with them in a friendly and positive way. And they're just trying to do the best they can. And we got to help them and push them to be a little bit more ambitious than they otherwise would be. I think it's important for us on the left to try to argue with people who have those views that that's not what's going on. I mean, Biden and the Democrats and Harris now, it's hard to make that mental shift to go from criticizing Biden to criticizing Harris, but I'm working on it. It's our job to argue that these people are the same people they were 10, 15 years ago. I mean, they're basically chameleons when it comes to their rhetoric and politics. Their left rhetoric, to the extent that it exists, is a reflection of being basically scared by Bernie, actually, from 2016 to 2020, and making some concessions to that and seeing the base of the party move to the left. But they're rhetorically chameleons, but I think in their substance, the substance of their program is still very much, defend the status quo, defend the corporate interests that back the party, their donor class. And the Democrats have really transformed themselves in the last couple decades into the conservative party in America. And I think it's helpful to think of them that way. They basically want to preserve the status quo. And that hasn't changed in the last few years. And, no one said this better than Joe Biden himself when he told those donors, nothing fundamental will change in my administration. And I think for the most part, that's true. I mean, there were changes. There were some, pivots to the left on a few questions, at least rhetorically. There were, during the pandemic itself, there was a substantive embrace of the welfare state, but that actually started under Trump, and it disappeared as soon as people declared the pandemic to be over. Mm-hmm. And I just think Bernie and these people on the left have forgotten that, or I don't know what's going on. Actually, I can't really explain it, but I think that they're mistaken about this assessment of where Biden and Harris are at, and it's our job on the left to push them on that.
And I just got to say, like on the media at least, there was a kind of thing when during the early Biden administration where people were saying like Biden has been moved to the left because he's pushing a spending package that is worth this much money, right? And it's like this was a global phenomenon. A lot of people dealing with this, this pandemic, and I think that some people sort of, for whatever reason, because I guess in American politics you're so used to there being a hesitancy to spend money like that on anything other than the military, that people are like, oh, something has opened and changed. And maybe it has. I don't know. Maybe we've moved into a different form of politics for the elite. But it wasn't. I don't know if I would categorize it as like them incorporating or a lot of like the Bernie Sanders style critiques of like American capitalism, as much as it was everybody's at home right now, and if we don't spend a lot, the American economy might collapse.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that I think something has changed in the country as a whole since 2008. I mean, that was a profound crisis for the kind of way of neoliberal capitalism that we were used to from 1980 to 2008. So there's a crisis in that model of doing things and of organizing public policy and stuff. And that crisis manifests itself in the Democratic Party in the form of Democrats feeling very uncertain and lacking confidence in what they're doing. And I think there's some kind of, you see that in Biden's rhetorical shifts and, even the embrace of the IRA. But that's not the same as being on the same page as us when it comes to the need for profound, changes in the structure of society and the economy and redistribution, the things that I think we all believe in, the things that Bernie believes in. And that's why it's so dangerous to mistake the Democrats' uncertainty for some sort of opening for us to work with them in a collaborative way. That doesn't, and this is what I'll finish on this point, on this answer, that doesn't mean that there isn't an opening for us. I think there is actually an opening. I think the Democrats, precisely because they're uncertain of where they're going, it's maybe possible to push a Biden or a Harris in a way that it wasn't possible to push a Clinton and Obama. But to make use of that, you can't believe that you're in a partnership with them. You have to believe that you're pushing them from the outside, and you have to have disruptive tactics and a disruptive strategy. You have to scare them. You have to push them. The only thing they respond to is power and organized muscle. They don't respond to, being nice and getting on an airplane with them and talking to them, whispering, little reassurances to them about how great they are and how they should definitely stay in the presidential election in July after everything collapsed. Like that just doesn't work.
Well, I mean, on that relationship there, I think that I'd be curious to hear. So since Biden became president, one of the things that we have been sort of advocating, on this show at least, is like, Democratic socialist elected officials and progressives, even if we want to even just expand the tent a little bit, like, yeah, they have to be a little bit more aggressive. They have to be, frankly, hostile. They have to be making a line and saying, like, our politics represent something different. And the tactic, that's not the tactic that they chose. So, I mean, I'm curious, like, what you all think about the relationship of Bernie Sanders, figures like Bernie Sanders and AOC, like, to the bases. Because I think that also plays like a big role here, at least in some of the pessimism that you see on people on the left, is that, like, when it becomes a kind of like a spectator sport, right? In the sense that, like, we're sort of watching from the outside. It's like, oh man, why didn't they run this play? Or why didn't they run that play? Like, the tactical conversations are important, don't get me wrong, but I also think that there's a fundamental disconnect between a lot of these elected officials now and this base of activists and folks who might consider themselves to be socialists in this country right now.
Yeah. Can I make a distinction here?
Yeah.
I would distinguish between the base and the activist layer. Bernie and AOC and others represent, if you want to take the socialist movement as a coherent bloc, Bernie and AOC, to the extent that they would still identify as democratic socialists, they represent the kind of central leadership layer of that bloc. And then there's a base of millions of people, actually. There were millions of people who voted for Bernie, millions of people who were open to a democratic socialist politics. And then between that top layer and that base layer, there's an activist layer, which are the folks folks like us and DSA and other kind of movement organizations. And I think that Bernie and the squad's direction in the last few years has been really discouraging and confusing to many of us in the activist layer, the sickos who pay attention to these things very closely. But I'm not quite sure that it's filtered down to the base all that much. I think Bernie is still enormously popular and AOC is still enormously popular at the base level. And I think we on the left risk making a mistake when we think that people in the base, the millions of people who we want to be connected to, think the same way we do as activists. And I think that actually, I think many of us know that there's a disconnect there between what we think and what the base thinks that we want to relate to. And I actually think part of the reason why this moment is so confusing and discouraging often is that we know that we're disconnected from that base and are not having a relationship to it. And we're actually kind of reduced to this sort of Monday morning quarterbacking or, armchair generaling or whatever your favorite metaphor is. And so I think the goal for us has to be to figure out, how do we build a new relationship to that base? And how do we talk to them and work with the fact that they do still see Bernie as their kind of spokesperson in politics? And how do we put forward a strategy? How do we basically take what Bernie's saying and take to their support for Bernie and say, well, there needs to be a strategy here. Bernie has some good ideas about what to do in 2025 in terms of demands to make, but there isn't a strategy here for winning it yet. And I think that's where we on the activist left can kind of come in and reinsert ourselves in the conversation in a meaningful way.
Yeah, can I just jump in real quickly? I agree with that, although I think I would say, and I don't have the data to back this up, but Bernie in his presidential campaigns mobilized a very large section of people, beyond the activists, but I think even probably beyond a lot of the people who we would consider as base now, who are paying attention and actively following him. I think, like, in those presidential campaigns, he represented a real alternative to the mainstream of the Democratic Party and to people like Hillary Clinton, which is part of what brought so many people in and got so many people excited. And I think his no longer representing that means there's a kind of shrinking of his base, or he's not actually reaching, the base that he could potentially and ideally reach. I mean, would you agree with that, Neil?
Yeah, I think he's not growing it, that's for sure. And I think he's lost important parts of it. I think, there's a section of the base that's, young people who are particularly horrified by what's happening in Gaza and feel like he didn't respond quickly enough at the beginning of this year. And there's, Palestine activists across the country a Muslim voter base that you may have been open to Bernie's politics in 2020 that are kind of upset, justifiably so, at the slow reaction that he had to what was going on. So I think there are sections of the base where the support is especially weak. But I still think that if you ask, a lot of teachers and nurses and truck drivers and janitors or whatever who vaguely were supporting Bernie in 2020, I think they're still with him. And those are the people we want to talk to, and we got to figure out how to relate to.
Yeah, and I think that relation question is the big one, right? Because I think, and I say this as a self-criticism, for all those folks who might have been kind of interested or attracted to Bernie Sanders style politics in 16 and in 20, they probably, even if they still maintain those positions, they might not be able to articulate groups in their local community or their state that are sort of building on those kind of politics as much as we would want them to be. And maybe that helps us get to this, just get to like what we should be doing. Neil, you wrote a really great piece on Left Notes, which there's a link below. People should be subscribing and reading Left Notes. It's a really, really exciting project, y'all. But I found this really interesting. You wrote this piece called The Politics of the Three Lefts, which I think articulated something that we've all been sort of dancing around trying to talk about for a while, at least in like lefty indie media. Could you talk about these three lefts, just introduce them a little bit, and the kind of general taxonomy that you were working from?
Yeah, definitely. So I started thinking about this, I don't know, a while ago. This piece started percolating in my brain when I was thinking about, like, when I started on the left, what I thought about what needed to happen. Me and my friends in 2012, 2013, we were all kind of obsessed with this idea of left unity. We were going to unite the left across this wide range of ideas and politics. And I see that kind of cropping up again on the left today as kind of like an answer to this problem right now that we're facing of feeling a little bit uncertain about the situation. This idea that we need to unite the left across lots of different differences and across lots of different organizations. And I wanted to, I think there's a good impulse there to want unity on the left, but I think there also needs to be an understanding that, like, the left is not a single block of politics and values and principles and strategies. And so I made a distinction between what I call the progressive left, which is maybe the right wing of the left. Those are the people like Elizabeth Warren, Working Families Party, maybe Bernie Sanders on his bad days, definitely Bernie Sanders on his bad days, and other folks like that. A lot of people in the unions, nonprofits. These are people who basically don't have a vision of a better society beyond capitalism. They would talk about reforms and maybe single payer healthcare, but their vision doesn't go beyond that kind of humanizing capitalism. And then on the far left of the left, I have this group I call the hard left, which is the folks around Party for Socialism and Liberation and other groups like that tend to have a much more intense, zealous commitment to their beliefs. They definitely believe in a future beyond capitalism, but they want to have no truck with the Democratic Party. They can be very aggressive in their tactics. I think there's sometimes a tendency to glorify violence in those circles. And there's no real commitment, as I see it, to democracy, either in society or in the organizations that they build. They would argue that that's necessary, that you have to have kind of a top-down leadership structure, both in your organizations and in the society we're aiming for, in order to destroy capitalism. And then between those two lefts, I would say there's a democratic left, which I think is basically the politics of DSA. And maybe Bernie Sanders on a good day, or hopefully Rashida Tlaib or someone like, other people like that, a lot of the DSA electeds, which, we believe in a transition beyond capitalism, a transition to socialism. But fundamental to our politics and our vision is a commitment to democracy, to nonviolent action and tactics, democracy both in society and in our organizations. And so I think the key for us right now, people I would identify in the Democratic left, is unity within the Democratic left and respecting that there is a place for the hard left and there's a place for the progressive left, and we can have relationships between them and we need to work together, but also understand that there's some differences there that have to be respected. Yeah,
I mean, I found it to be, It's an interesting piece. Just that's, I think, in that kind of argument of sort of recognizing where these differences exist and why there is some kind of value in saying, like, this is what our politics are, instead of this kind of murky thing that you get. I mean, one of the things that's sort of funny about, I think, frankly, post 2020, and I think you're really seeing it right now, is a lot of people who sort of are like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. I like them all, right? They're all kind of interesting. And then that line became really, really blurry between some of those folks and some of the other people who were like, Bernie Sanders is the only person, how dare you even bring up an Elizabeth Warren? And I think, for example, you're seeing it very clearly right now with, I think, some of that section of the progressive left where that line has been made a little murky. I think a lot of them are very kind of happy to be re-embraced into the Democratic Party via Kamala, right? And I think that's something that I think a lot of people should sort of take a lesson from about, like, yeah, there's a lot we can work together on. There's a lot we can agree on, but man, here's a very fundamental difference in our politics being kind of brought to light in front of us right now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I mean, where would you sort of put something like the Green Party movement right now into that taxonomy, if you don't mind me throwing a little bit of a curveball to you? Because I find this taxonomy like interesting, but I also think that one thing that I'm really worried about, and it gives me a lot of anxiety, is that, like, I was on the left before the Bernie moment. I'm fairly young, but I came up, in the relatively, right. I came up with the Occupy, that was like my experience, and then Bernie. But I remember those few years of kind of marginality in left-wing politics. And I do see right now in this kind of crisis of Democrat, if you want to call it crisis, but this kind of issue within democratic socialism, there's that division again, right? Which is, should we return to doing kind of like incoherent, I'll call it, incoherent, eccentric, kind of outside the mainstream politics? And I'm seeing there's like a lot of push to return to that. And I'll just put my cards on the table. I'm not going back to doing that kind of thing ever again. But I'm curious, like, if you would consider them to be, if you would fit them in anywhere, if it's too dispersed to really fairly slot them in any of those groups.
Yeah, I got to say, I don't know enough about what's going on with the Green Party. I hear strange things about Jill Stein going to Moscow, but also, I've always had the vibe with the Green Party that it's a bunch of nice people at farmers markets who want to build some windmills and don't like the Democrats, which I respect. And I do think, Nader was actually a pretty impressive campaign in 2000. I remember being kind of inspired by that as a kid, or at least interested by it. I think that maybe the Green Party spans some cross-section of all three parts of the left in a sort of confusing manner. And that's all right. I think that it's really, the main thing I want to try to stress to people is that the Green Party is a particular way of doing independent politics outside the Democratic Party. And I don't think it's the only way to do politics outside the Democratic Party. And I think when people say, oh, well, the Green Party proves that there's no life outside of the Democratic Party, I don't think that's a legitimate argument. I mean, that's just one group doing something. I mean, there's other examples to learn from.
Well, on that, and we only have a couple more minutes, but I wanted to just sort of to start to get us to some of the things that we need to do here. Looking at this question of, so some people who watch this program are haters will say, David and Matt, they've just been spending time sheepdogging people back to the Democratic Party, right? So I was wondering if y'all want to like respond to that perspective, like that kind of criticism of like what we might call like Jacobin or DSA politics. And then on that, I would actually be very curious because we've talked a lot about like big figures like AOC and Bernie Sanders, but like, do you think that like, the entire movement has been quote unquote like co-opted into the progressive left? Because I think there's been, I think there's so much focus on Bernie and AOC that ends up defining everyone's understanding of what's happened over the past 4 years. And I think that's can be a pretty big mistake. But either Nick or Neil, whoever feels prime for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, putting aside what's happening with those figures, I think that there is a sort of vibrant Democratic left, to use Neil's terminology, that, has continued to exist and grow. And I think that, DSA and Jacobin, they're both, somewhat big tents in their own way. So, there are people who are, for instance, within DSA, maybe have less, are more positive about the Biden administration's achievements, or less critical of the strategy that folks like Bernie have taken, that have less of a feeling that we do need to really make an effort to eventually break beyond the Democrats, which is something that Neil and I have long argued, that to really have a political force that can take on the capitalist class and that can build socialism, we can't exist forever in the same party with billionaires, right? When J.B. Pritzker gets up on the stage at the DNC and says, take it from the real billionaires, this is who you ought to be voting for, whatever. It's like,
no socialist for Pritzker.
Well, yeah. I mean, Liz Cheney is apparently on the side of democracy now. We can't have her and Liz Halliburton on our side and make things a lot.
Yeah, the tent has gotten a little too big, I think. So I do think that DSA and a lot of folks at Jacobin and in our orbit, still have this kind of more radical vision, this sharper critique of the Democratic Party, and we continue to argue there's a tactical use in running socialist candidates on the Democratic ballot line, supporting some folks who are running as Democrats. We just think that can't be the horizon. I'll kick it to Neil, close us out.
Yeah. I think one of I love taxonomies as the sociologist in me, but I think one of the dangers in them is that you create these very clean lines, and a lot of the actual tension and work of politics gets lost when you do that. So I think, when you think about the Democratic left, and you think about the progressive left, and you think about who's being pulled to the right or who's moving to the left, you have to think about it as relationships between poles, maybe is one helpful way to think about it. That there are these poles that stand for certain politics, and everyone's kind of in a space between them. And it's our job as organizers to pull people towards the pole that we feel we need to organize around. And I think that when people accuse, for example, Jacobin or DSA of sheepdogging people into the Democratic Party, or you guys of sheepdogging people into the Democratic Party, what they're saying, I think, reveals that they don't understand that role of organizers, and they don't understand what we're doing. And maybe that's a problem for us, that we need to explain these things better. But I think what we're doing is that we are, doing the messy work of politics, of operating kind of in this space between the Democratic Party and independents. I mean, a lot of us in DSA are working for candidates who run in the Democratic Party primaries, but we want to build an independent party in the future. And I think it's just more honest, actually, what we're doing. We're acknowledging that politics is messy, that this moment is messy, that our base is not ready for independent politics tomorrow, and that there has to be a process of building that. And that's what we're doing. We're not sheepdogging anybody.
Well, no, I mean, I really appreciate that last bit too. Is actually trying to think about what a relationship to an actually existing base in this country is. Because sometimes you'll hear people, and maybe I'm paying too much attention to YouTube comments, but there's this talk as if there's just this communist mass that's just sort of they're just so their noses are just upturned at DSA and Jacobin leftists because we haven't embraced the immortal science of Marxism, Leninism, or something like that. When I think it's actually that a lot of people aren't feeling very politically active, and they feel like their horizons are foreclosed. And part of the job of socialists right now is to convince people that politics is something that they can do to make their lives better.
Exactly.
Well, I feel like we are leaving this conversation hanging, but there's a place the conversation can continue. The excellent Substack Left Notes. Could y'all? We'll point people to it below in the show notes. But if y'all want to just let folks know about that, how they can support you, and where they can find your other work too.
Yeah, so we're on Substack. I think it's left-notes.com. Unfortunately, someone else took leftnotes.com, all one word. But we live in the world we do, and we make the best of it. But yeah, it's our platform for sharing stuff we're writing. Nick and I write a lot about politics, strategy. Nick's been doing a great philosophy series recently, which I really appreciate and think is very important. One of those cool things to do during the ebb times is thinking about kind of the moral basis of our politics. And I think Nick's doing a great job of that. And we write at Jacobin and some other publications. I know Nick's been writing a lot for Dollars and Cents recently, a lefty economic magazine. So we're trying to get our stuff out there, trying to get ideas out there, and I appreciate anyone's support. Hopefully people subscribe to our Substack.
Well, they definitely should. Well, Nick and Neil, thank y'all so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Great.
All right, friends. That was great having both Nick and Neil on there, wasn't it, Matt?
Absolutely nice, sane conversation.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it was a real pleasure. I feel like kind of missing out on a lot of those more theoretical, strategic conversations versus what seems like a never-ending slog of moralism. But folks, we're about to go over to Postgame. To support the program and get access to all of these bonus episodes, conversations that we're having, sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We had a really great conversation.
I was just going to say, or to thank us for you not having to go anywhere, because we're going to stay here for the post game tonight. So you can just stay seated. Don't need to even click another link.
Yeah. But you should click another link and then come right back to this, because we're going to have an open post game tonight, a little bit of debate prep. So get those questions ready, folks, particularly our patrons. If you're in the Discord, start loading us up with some questions. Matt and I have a couple of stories we're going to be talking about. We'll be talking about Kamala Harris and Trump's debate coming up in just a minute. But yeah, it's going to be open today. So you can just hang on for a minute or two. We'll play some music. We'll be right back. But if you would like to support the show, do it at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Do not forget to subscribe to Left Notes. There's a link below in the show notes for you to do that as well. But Matt and I will be back in like 2 minutes for the pre-debate open post game.
Yes, folks. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Let's keep it rolling.
Fun. Yeah. Got that all fixed at the bottom there. Yeah, man. That was a lot of fun. This is open post-game, friends. Welcome to the other shot. If you haven't been over here, these are a little bit more casual than the main shows. We'll be taking questions, hanging out with all of y'all, patrons. I hope y'all don't mind our new guests this evening. Say hello. If y'all are on the Patreon and you're in the Discord, you can ask those questions in the Discord, and we'll try to get some of those as well. But we'll also be taking super chats from the general audience as well. So y'all get those in for us. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about what's going on.
Well, and do check out our Patreon folks who aren't subscribed to the Patreon. We had Ben Case on again, and his efforts along with pro-Palestine folks in Pittsburgh to try to get a ballot initiative to folks. A really interesting case study in organizing, despite not turning out the way we'd all want it to. So yeah, check that out. Really interesting episode.
Yeah, and Matt, just before, sorry everyone to do this live, but my mic levels are okay. I'm not like clipping in and out or anything.
You sound good to me. How about chat? How are we sounding?
It sounds like we're good. I just wanted to make sure because I think there were some issues in the recording on my end, so I want to make sure that we're good. But all right, sorry for we just went live into this because Matt has to get to his other job right after this.
We're gonna triple today.
Yeah, Matt's a real trooper. I mean, do you want to just sort of do we want to do any of these other stories, or do you want to talk a little bit of your pregame analysis here?
Well, so I got a new segment that can kind of transition us into the pregame analysis, and it's called "Stealing the New York Times." Maybe we'll workshop that name, but I do not pay for the New York Times. I don't think you should. I think it's a pretty detestable organization, but I do have to read it for work. And let me come back in focus here. And so that's what we're going to do right now. You might have saw this headline at the New York Times: inside the Trump-Harris debate prep. And yeah, we'll do. There we go. Kamala Harris is camped out at a Pittsburgh hotel. Donald Trump is being peppered informally by aides. Both sides share the same belief about why the debate is so crucial. It's interesting. The New York Times, of course, along with the Washington Post, two of America's papers of records, they call them. Just sort of like historical, all the news goes here. But you see how infantilized this is, because we'll need the aid of the American prospect to really decode this. But there's some funny stuff in here. Let's see if I can get a little bit smaller, actually. Don't I need to be? Here we go. I can read it. There we go. Vice President Kamala Harris is holed up for 5 days in a Pittsburgh hotel doing highly choreographed debate practice sessions ahead of Tuesday night's clash. There's a stage and replica TV lighting and an advisor in full Lee Strasberg method acting mode, not just playing Donald J. Trump, but inhabiting him, wearing a boxy suit and a long tie. And what's the comedian that whose name is really difficult to pronounce?
Shane Gillis?
No, Gillis does do a Trump too. The guy who did the Comedy Central one. I feel like that.
Oh yeah, I can't
that's
remember.
Who I'm imagining.
Yeah.
The former president's preparations are more improv. They are pointedly called not debate prep, but policy time, which I think is so funny. Like, well, listen to how this policy time ends and see how much policy time we think it really is. But policy time meant to refresh him on his record. Nobody is playing Mrs. Harris. Sometimes his aides, what do they call her? Anyway. Ms. Harris, shouldn't be no period anyway. Ms. Harris, sometimes his aides sit at a long table opposite him and back questions back and forth, or other times he pulls up a chair to them. Mr. Trump has held just a handful of sessions so far, interrupting one at his Las Vegas hotel so he and advisors could go up to his suite and watch Mrs. Harris's convention speech. Again, that's what he's calling policy time. It ends with him going to watch how she spoke to an audience full of people. Of course, we got to get Hillary Clinton involved here, so you'd love her input.
She did a great job.
Yeah, exactly. The people who know how to lose to President Trump. She should not be baited. She should bait him, Hillary Clinton, the last woman to debate Mr. Trump. What a weird distinction. The last woman to debate Mr. Trump said in an interview on Thursday. When I said he was a Russian puppet, he just sputtered on stage. I think that's an example of how you get a fact out about him that really unnerves him. I mean, if you say so yourself, Hillary.
That's so bad. I mean, look, I don't think that Trump's response to her calling him a puppet is going to be studied for generations to come as like a grand rhetorical reposette.
No,
But
no.
it's also something that everyone loves to watch because it is very funny for him to say, "I'm no puppet, you're a puppet." Right?
But honestly, I don't think that was was that really a defining moment? I don't remember.
Like
Like
they're
emails
not
on
body slams, right? It's just like, oh, she
yeah,
said something, and then Trump sort of like responded off the cuff, not particularly well, but not bad. For
in kind of a
like
funny way.
in the kind of stupid blood sport that debates are.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I think he returned serve adequately there. Um, Unlike Mr. Biden, she is not. I mean, this is where you get the kind of good stuff, but there's stuff omitted from this article that undermines this. Such as the nature of the multivocal nature of politics. Unlike Mr. Biden, she is not focused squarely on portraying the former president as a fundamental threat to American democracy. She has tried to minimize him as a stale old act who is repeating his same tired playbook, and she has painted him as a rich guy who cares only about helping other rich guys. A populist line of attack that resonates with voters in focus groups. Huh? Who would have imagined that? That's only like anyway. Miss Harris has also ditched Miss Clinton's unsuccessful strategy. I mean, I appreciate a little bit of shade after the Clinton quote was included of denouncing Mr. Trump as a racist and a misogynist. The vice president aide believes it's a waste of time to tell voters what a terrible person Mr. Trump is, given how hard it is to find a voter who does not already have a fixed view of his character, good or bad. Basic logic. I agree with that. Instead, Mrs. Harris is trying to connect with the thin slice of undecided voters who feel sour about the economy and worried about the future and who want to hear what each candidate will do to improve lives.
This is the dumbest way to go, just given how she's run her campaign, because Donald Trump is about to body slam her on the economy, which has been like the move that they've been doing. And because they've laid no groundwork, right, for what their politics are, what their plan is, Donald Trump is going to come out and he's going to say, some version of, do you think that you're better off now than you were 4 years ago? To which most people in America's answer is going to be no. I don't give a shit what the stats say. You can look at, there's plenty of debate and argument about this, and this kind of like
plenty of stats too.
Whiny little liberal thing of being like, hey, if I bury my head 5 feet in the earth on this question, it's going to go away. No, it will not. So Kamala and them haven't done very much to pull themselves out of this. In fact, because they haven't done very much, they are now sort of defined by Joe Biden and the Biden administration. Focusing on this kind of person, like that's an interesting strategy, right? Maybe should have tried that 2 months ago, right? Because right now Donald Trump is going to be able to define you, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's the worry is like even she'll come out and even if her rent control was like as we would write it, right? Her policies in 2020 that she's actively running away from now were similar, right? Like yeah, in theory I agree with that. I don't trust you to follow through with that. But yeah, anyway, but in general I like the idea this stuff I think is true that you can't just run on him being a racist and him being a threat to democracy. That stuff's crazy. One more little paragraph I'll include here from the New York Times before we get help from the American Prospect. Miss Harris's sessions at the Omni William Penn Hotel in Pittsburgh have been led by Karen. I mean, Elon Musk got to know that giving out her assassination coordinates. That's crazy. It's ridiculous that he's so secretive about his own whereabouts when presidential candidates. So yeah, I'm at that hotel. Try it. Miss Harris' sessions at the Omni William Penn Hotel in Pittsburgh have been led by Karen Dunn, a Democratic lawyer who also helped Mrs. Clinton prepare for the debates. Miss Dunn's co-pilot is Rohini Kasuglu. Don't know him. Maybe we'll find out more about him later. Now let's go to our friends at the American Prospect. Luke Goldstein wrote this, today. Debate prep by day, Google defense by night. Karen Dunn is helping Kamala Harris and defending big tech from a lawsuit brought by the Biden-Harris administration. The case has spotlighted a brawl between Dunn's law firm and DOJ, and you just need the first two paragraphs here to understand what's going on. Kamala Harris's political advisor, Karen Dunn, seems to have the unusual ability to exist in two places at once. Last week, she both prepped Harris in Pittsburgh for tonight's presidential debate against Donald Trump and prepped legal defense strategy in Alexandria, Virginia courtroom for Google, who is facing a monopolization lawsuit brought by Harris's own administration. The first day of Google trial began Monday with Dunn, a partner with the firm Paul, Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, giving the opening statement in court. If that seems to you like a blatant conflict of interest, the Harris team would like to recommend that you focus your attention elsewhere. Nothing to see here. But even the Trump campaign has picked up on it, criticizing Harris directly for her coziness with big tech's top lawyers. Whatever debate wizardry Dunn's talents apparently provide for Harris comes with the cost of opening her up to attacks from the right. And it is just interesting. How did the New York Times characterize her? The Dunn, a Democratic lawyer. Well, there are lots of Democratic lawyers. Some of them like focus on civil rights, that sort of stuff. Some of them give the opening statement for fucking Google against the administration you're currently serving in. And so if this pitch to the working people to try to pay Trump, which what he should be, a million, allegedly billionaire, but multimillionaire developer, rentier. You should be able to do that, but I'm not encouraged by the tech execs you got advice and lawyers you got advising you.
No, and I think because of a lot of the other political conversation we're having about Kamala Harris, a lot of people are sort of missing the fact that this is somebody who is very, very much connected to Silicon Valley, in that section of capital, and I'm sure
massively.
Trump and all them, I think, want to hit her more on being, a loony leftist or a Marxist, etc. But I do think that, for the rest of us, this person is like very serious connections with Silicon, as we've talked about in depth. Why there is such like a strong Wall Street and wealthy American community very excited to be backing Kamala Harris. This is something to take actually very, very seriously. The kind of pivots that we might see from a potential Kamala administration. But at this point, I don't even know if we should be talking about that kind of thing, because I have to say that when Kamala first took over from Joe Biden, it sort of seemed like there was that brief window when it seemed like Trump and the right were just completely bamboozled at at the tactic and the strategy that they weren't really going to have much of a response. J.D. Vance, continues to be the swagless VP. And, it seemed like it might be a bit of a slam dunk for them. They were just going to run a vibes campaign. We're not Trump campaign. But that honeymoon is very, very much over. And what has been extremely worrying to me has been exactly what you're talking about in this little presentation that you have for us, Matt, is that the bright minds that are surrounding Kamala Harris don't really come off to me as people who are going to be able to pull that campaign over the finish line.
No, one thing to say is tech at a moment where crypto's bust, I guess making an impact, but like they're out of ideas and hated. Their most promising projects are taking over both political parties, because J.D. Vance is in the catbird seat with all the Peter Thiel guys with the Republicans, and Kamala Harris's brother-in-law is people talk about him as Attorney General. That would take massive cojones, I think, for her to put her brother-in-law as Attorney General. But that it's even being talked about is fucking wild to me. The Uber counsel that he is. Tech won, despite having they trying to feed you chatbots. And that's part of Obama's legacy in this recovery that post 2008, that we mentioned with the guys up top. Like, that's who won. That's who benefited. Finance and tech.
It's really funny, Matt, for people who, people out there who like to say things like uniparty and duopoly and all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, seem to be a bit infatuated that now like RFK has joined up with Donald Trump to take down the bad guys. And there's a video platform out there called Rumble that y'all can watch a bunch of shows that like some of them haven't gone as far as just saying, oh, we like Donald Trump. But if you look at their coverage, seems to be focused at their fire seems to be focused one direction. Probably no better example of actual unity between the Republican and the Democratic Party right now is just how deeply embedded big tech is with both of these organizations. Historical connections with the Democratic Party. Now in the Republicans, you have J.D. Vance, who is just like the literal embodiment of like a greasy check from a Silicon Valley billionaire. Obviously, people like Elon Musk promoting all kinds of nut stuff. I mean, never before have you just seen if you are a single issue voter and you're like, I want Silicon Valley freaks to have less control over my life and my future, right? you actually don't have a choice.
Yeah, you're fucked. Sorry, man.
You're kind of done. It's just like, which one do you want? Do you want like the super, super cynical guys, who also want to get rid of like child labor law, or the guys
Right.
who, believe that, the meritocracy of America has been denied, and we basically need to put a bunch of Stanford graduates in charge of the Department of Education.
Yeah, and rename it the Department of Masculinity.
Oh, man, I'll tell you. I think I don't know if that stuff is going to be going away anytime soon. I keep on thinking that it might be running its course, but no.
No, I think that's probably a good bet.
Well, folks, let's throw in one or two questions just to pepper it up here. And as always, we're going to be starting with our Discord and our patrons, and you can do that by signing up at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We do also very much appreciate super chats during these. But we wanted to note here as a great kind of segue into why you should become a patron of the program. From Lobster Hierarchy, great conversation with Ben Case on Sunday. Blows my mind that they got 15,000 signatures in less than 7 weeks. Great insights to help out the work doing in the rest of the country in Salt Lake City to build an initiative for social housing in Salt Lake. But we're preparing to be on the ballot in 2027. Hell yeah. The Utah legislature is afraid of direct democracy, so they want to allow themselves to repeal or replace any ballot initiative passed. It has been added last minute for November Amendment D, which people should vote no on if it gets through the courts tomorrow and is actually on the ballot. And yeah, that conversation with Ben Case, I'm sure will be up sometime for the public, but this is a good reason for people to be subscribing to the program if you're not already.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest to convey. I think the actual excitement I get listening to it with the title, given the depressing sort of outcome that happened.
Mhm.
But the way that that talks about the ballot initiative attempt as a way to just get out in the community and organize people on that issue, and finding out how much support you have. It was very, very interesting to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to be a participant in it, right? And I think that one thing has been shown, also people like Luke Mayville, who we found on the program a few times, a good friend of mine, and Michael Brooks, who's been doing incredible work in Idaho, has been that when it comes to politics right now, especially in a moment like this, right, where it feels like things might feel foreclosed or difficult, we're not in power, there's a lot of ghouls, out there who it seems like we're in a difficult situation where it's Harris or Trump here, which is mighty depressing. Those kind of movements, like ballot initiatives in particular, are really great ways to take democratic questions to the people, because not just in the sense of how effective they can be or whatnot, but I think it's also really important. I think for folks who are very engaged in politics to be engaged in the kind of work that reminds you that there is a very, very inspiring left base out there. People who want things like Medicare for all, things who want there to be an end to the genocide in Gaza, people who want there to be things like social housing. And so much of American politics is sort of set up to confuse you or to make you feel like that's not a reality. And the average American is, super conservative reactionary. When in fact, it's two political organizations that sort of try to foreclose and limit public participation in politics, and finding ways to get around that is something that should give you a lot of mobilization and motivation.
Right. It's one thing and an important mission to talk about turning out people who are just oppressed and disenfranchised and that stuff. I also point to, was it whichever election DeSantis got in was the same election that Floridians voted to
Yeah.
re-enfranchise felons.
Yeah.
And it's just like that same electorate will do that shit. And it's like,
Mhm.
it's a good example.
Well, let's see if this is right. No, sorry. There's another question here I can get to. Bliss BL Smith says, if y'all get time, I'd love to hear what y'all think and can be tackled in terms of campaign finance reform. What, if anything, can we pressure candidates, current electeds, and lobbyists with to get the ball rolling? Is there anything current or brewing that folks can donate or call the representatives about?
I mean, that's a good question because it seems like I remember hearing about Citizens United during the Bush era and imagining the future that it might create, and it's like, oh yeah, this is pretty much, pretty much it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think one of the most effective things has been the viability of running campaigns where you refuse that money. Just because that seems to be something that's very motivating for people. But I mean, campaign finance reform it's one of those kind of things that I think, going back to the conversation we were just having about things like ballot initiatives, if you can find ways to get around the party to do it, I think that's viable. I think that one thing that's important to note, and this is where sometimes having a little bit of an international perspective can be helpful, is that you look at other countries that don't have the kind of legalized bribery systems that we have in America. Well, they have kind of old school bribery going on in a lot of those political systems, and like the big problem when it comes to the power of the rich and corporations to influence our politics is sort of a separate question from whether or not it's legalized or not, right? And don't get me wrong, it'd be way better if it's not legalized, because then you have more tools that we can use to sort of weaken the influence of billionaires and the rich and powerful. But I think it's really important that we don't sort of lose our laser focus on actually building up that working class movement as our kind of base in politics, right? Because sometimes people get kind of excited about reform. And reform in and of itself is going to be the thing that gets us out of this problem. And the reality is that, like, you can have reforms, or you can not have the kind of corruption that we have in this country, and still not have a very government that's very reflective of the people.
Right. Like as Antonio points out, wasn't Citizens United decided under Obama? You're right. It was 2010. And we didn't have a democracy free of the influence of corporate and financial interests before that either.
Yeah. Well, Matt, then let's talk a little bit about the debate tonight. I mean, we talked a little bit about what the New York Times is saying about it. We're hearing that the kind of strategy, I guess, is that she's going to talk to this undecided economic moderate. I mean, what are you thinking going into it?
Well, she's talking about rent control today. That's kind of interesting. So that would go with the New York Times reporting. I do not think we're going to get nearly a result.
Is she talking about rent control? She's saying that she's going to come after corporate landlords.
Gouges.
Right?
Yeah.
Which sounds like a way that, I mean, honestly, it sounds like what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, where like software that was being used by certain landlords to sort of, coordinate rent increases, right?
Yeah.
Which is something that should be illegal. But that's something very different from like attacking landlords in general. I think that, they love to be a little weaselly about these kind of things.
Yeah, and so I honestly think I'd be surprised if there's a knockout blow one way or the other tonight. I don't think it's going to be like the first debate. I think there's risks for Kamala because, like you said about the Trump, but I honestly think Trump doesn't have his fastball either, or discipline. And so I think it's going to be like kind of those football games where it's sort of like 6-13 with like one touchdown that was like a fumble recovery for.
Well, you're talking about this would be like this is going to be like a 1960s presidential debate.
Exactly. I'd be shocked if there's a bunch of high potent offense going on. I think, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, putting on my ugly pundit hat, pundit hat, pundit hat. I think that this is in a lot of ways a kind of make or break moment for the Kamala Harris campaign. I think that what we've seen in the past few weeks has been very worrying to me about their ability to kind of litigate this campaign. I think, for better or worse, that I think that there is a severe limitation on Kamala's current strategy to just sort of not be Trump and to also not be Biden. I think that has allowed Donald Trump to define Kamala Harris both as Joe Biden and also as this radical loony left San Francisco Marxist, which is a loser for her because obviously the actual left here in this country is not particularly enamored with her. So I think this is a very kind of critical debate for her, and I'm very worried about the people who've been advising her. I think the people who've been advising her don't really get how to do that kind of mass politics. So I think that I think it's very clear though that Trump hasn't had the same kind of left hook, let's call it, than he has in the past. Kamala Harris is also not Hillary Clinton in the same way that Hillary Clinton's one of her biggest weaknesses was her ego, right? And you could really get under her skin, and she wanted to present herself in a certain way. She didn't care actually about being liked by the public or the masses as much as sort of establishing herself as somebody who's in the elite and understands the world, all this kind of stuff. I think Kamala has those kind of tendencies, but I think not to such a degree as Hillary. So I could see Kamala being able to respond better to some of Trump's antics. But
yeah, I mean, I think Kamala can be good in certain contexts. I think there's a bit of an overstatement of how bad she was because of Tulsi thing, the gambit she tried to run to the left. Because I think I think she has prosecutorial skills.
I mean, do you remember that little girl was me?
Right, but that was her playing a social justice activist.
Yeah.
And that's not who she is. She's a prosecutor, and Trump is, objectively a criminal. And so I think that
she's going to say.
I think she could say that,
yeah,
something like that to trigger him. Actually,
yeah. I mean, I actually would put money that she is.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The felon thing.
The question is how overt it's going to be,
and how much Trump. I think Trump should just scoff it off. I would imagine they told him to do that, but I think he probably will respond.
I think what's really dangerous about this debate is that Trump hits really hard on the economy, and Trump's just not going to be able to offer much there. But people feel upset, and he speaks to it. That works.
Well, that's the other thing is that's working for Trump as he's the change guy. But if I'm Stephen Miller or whoever, I'm not taking that to the bank because he's also been shy from the public too himself. He's doing alternative media, but he's not doing a lot of campaigns. People might realize that this is a rerun too. And so that could wear out. So I think it's going to be very close.
I mean, I think another thing that is obviously going to be a big thing is they're going to talk about immigration. And this is a difficult thing for Kamala Harris and the Biden administration, because what she's going to do is she's going to say, actually, we're really tough on the border. We're strong on the border. We're going to get them, right? Because that's been the tactic and the strategy from her camp. Well, Trump is just going to be able to be I think to be able to say, hey, well, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Because if she wants to try to differentiate herself from him, she's not really left with a lot of rhetorical room on that stage, other than saying things like, I've deported this many people. I'm interested in keeping this many people out, right? So being able to not seem like she's just sort of giving the game away to him, I think that's going to be a little bit difficult. I think they've dug themselves into a little bit of a hole here, because he's going to say, you're open borders, and she's going to say, no, I'm not. And I don't know. I don't know how she wins that point.
Yeah, I think that the Democrats eat shit on that point and every election by doing that exact thing. And yeah, they'll definitely do that again. Whether that can swing anything, I think the border people are pretty much Trump.
Well, not just okay. Yeah, the border people are pretty much Trump, but one of the things that has been effective about Trump in the past is like the racial overtones of his politics, right? And as you know, like, oh, what have they been doing this week talking about Haitian migrants eating cats and ducks? I mean, like this is as bottom of the barrel, just anti-human politics that you're getting from the right wing. And if Kamala wants to run as hard on the border, it doesn't give her as much space to be able to articulate herself as like a humanitarian, right? I mean, without undermining, if she wants to be seen as strong on the border and then also do the humanitarian stuff, I mean, those are two different poles that I think will be a little bit hard to balance. And maybe they do, and that'd be great. That could be a real winner for them if they're able to sort of say, hey, we're serious about enforcing American laws when it comes to immigration. But what you're doing right now is you're attacking American citizens, right? And I think they could definitely do that. I don't know if they'll have the capacity to do it. I mean, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of Jan 6 stuff. I think the Jan 6 stuff is kind of spent.
Well, that's the thing.
I think it's really motivating and mobilizing for a certain segment of people. I don't know how convincing it is. And maybe that's just what you got to do. You got to play up to your people, and it gets people excited, and they want to get the hat and the street sign.
I think they like the sort of people that tell them that they're a Jan 6 voter, and they just love to play to that.
They do love it. Yeah.
Like, I mean, the Cheney stuff, like, it's just, whether those people aren't turning out for Trump, like I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think. I think we'll see. I've been quite worried that they're not going to be able to figure out how to run this kind of campaign against somebody like Donald Trump, who I think is very beatable, and I think in a lot of ways is weaker than he has ever been. But there's that kind of famous Simpsons meme, right, of the Democratic Party, and it's like, we hate life and ourselves, so we can't govern, right? And in a lot of ways, like, I think one thing that's been really surprising about Democrats in the past, like 2 years at least, has been that there's another, like, beyond a kind of like self-pessimism. It's like they don't like doing politics. Like, they don't like doing politics. And like what we used to joke about the Democrats all the time is like, they just want to have these like West Wing fantasies, right? And now I feel like they're allergic to even doing that kind of stuff, right?
No, they don't like West Wing. They like the Sister Soldier moment where they discipline the left. Like, that's what they think that they'll be rewarded for that. Yeah.
Well, do you think Kamala Harris, this is from Vegetable Sauce in the Discord, do you think Kamala Harris will challenge Trump to golf?
Oh, fuck. Gee, that was grim. I remember that.
That was the best part of the debate for me.
You're not better than Trump at golf, Joe. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be something else tonight. Well, folks, I think we're gonna run and get prepped for the rest of the evening and the debate tonight. Thank you so much, Nick and Neil, for joining us in the main show. People definitely check out Left Notes if you haven't watched. If you haven't kept up with that publication before, it's on Substack. Matt, thank you very much for hanging out with me. We'll be back this Sunday with a bonus episode. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access. You won't want to miss it, friends. But until then, see you soon.
See you, folks.